Hello and welcome to today's module, Building Trust and Cohesion. These are some of the founding principles of championship team building. The sources of this information come out of our textbook for the course, our required textbook by Wade Gilbert, Coaching Better Every Season. Also our optional textbook of Weinberg and Gould, Foundation of Sport and Exercise Psychology, as well as our other optional textbook by Jeff Jensen, Championship Team Building, Winning the Mental Game. Our learning objectives for this module are to be able to define and describe linear group dynamics, define cohesion and differentiate between task and social cohesion, describe the 7 C's of championship team building, discuss keys to developing collective efficacy, and describe team building guidelines. As a coach, it's our job to guide the journey, set the culture, and leave a legacy. So how is that done? Well, we've already discussed how developing and applying your coaching philosophy and vision sets us on a path to also set target outcomes so that way we can put our vision in motion. Now we're going to discuss building trust and team cohesion. Later on in the semester, we'll talk about optimizing learning and motivation along with developing talent and coaching. By implementing our coaching philosophy, really what we're doing is we want to create an inclusive environment and embrace diversity. And how do you do that? We need to be able to do that through respecting each other, valuing one another, and trusting one another. Why is it so important to develop trust? Well, I think intuitively we know this, but research also backs this up, is that it's going to improve our motivation, our collective efficacy, and the performance of both individuals and a team. Athletes will never reach their peak performance unless a deliberate and sustained effort to teach and build trusting relationship occurs between coaches and teammates. So what are some fundamental guidelines for developing trust? Well, they may be self-explanatory, but it's always worth reiterating. First off, when you're developing mutual trust, it's important that it's deliberate. We have to make efforts to make it happen. This comes through shared experiences like training sessions and road trips and hanging out in the locker rooms and having social interactions outside of the practice field or courts or playing field as well. It also requires that everyone on the team is vulnerable, that we're able to share our weaknesses and our fears, as well as have open and honest communication with one another. It's important that coaches understand that there's team building activities that will help facilitate developing trust and cohesion, as well as the importance of having a supportive social network around us to help us through these challenging times, as well as the need for having a supportive behavior by the coaches, athletes, and teammates to help us through all the challenges that we'll face along the journey. So we've discussed the why of developing mutual trust and the how to do it. What happens when we do actually develop this mutual trust? Well, if you've ever experienced a trusting relationship, especially in a team setting, you can absolutely identify with these 3 things. Physical skills improve, mental skills improve, and team building is enhanced. So with our physical skills improving, that means our performance is going to improve. When our mental skills improve and we have better coping mechanisms and we can focus more because we're not worried or anxious about what other people think, it really helps us dial in to the moment and be able to do our best in the activity or event that we are participating in. And lastly, with team building, it enhances those relationships, the overall experience, and just the general cohesion of the group, the willingness to work hard for one another. So how can we define cohesion? Well, first off, we have to know that it's a dynamic process. It's constantly moving. Either it's being built or it's being destroyed. So once you believe you have good team chemistry, you got to work hard to keep it. But it involves that there's a desire for group activity involvement, right? That you actually genuinely are attracted to the group, that you enjoy being with each other, and that you actually work hard at the common goal. There's interest in developing relationships, as well as there's usually associated benefits of being with the group. But never forget it's multidimensional. And these multidimensional aspects really play a key role in developing cohesion. The multi-dimensions of cohesion include task and social cohesion. Task cohesion is simply defined as the degree to which the group works together to achieve a common goal. Whereas In social cohesion, it's the degree to which the members actually enjoy being with one another and hanging out. And oftentimes, you'll find teams that are high in social cohesion, they hang out a lot outside of the team-required events such as practice and games. So what does the research say about social and task cohesion? Well, the research indicates that both are highly linked to improved team performance. Now, it's also indicated that the social cohesion is actually more important to team cohesion than task cohesion because it's really about the satisfaction and performance that is our ultimate goal. So if you think about the social cohesion is really the satisfaction element, whereas the task cohesion is the performance element. If you all are in a trusting relationship and have more social cohesion, you tend to have better performance as well. Whereas if you have task cohesion only, you may not have the same satisfaction within the team. Therefore, the performance may be good, but it's not as good as it may be when you have social cohesion. Now think about this for a minute. When Kobe Bryant and Shaq were on the same team, they were high in task cohesion. So you can absolutely accomplish great things when you have only task cohesion. But if you were to interview them or listen to interviews of them, in the midst of when they were both on the same team, there was not a great deal of satisfaction. There was actually a big rift between the two of them. So there was low social cohesion and high task cohesion, yet they still won many championships. So it's not to say you can't have high performance with only task cohesion. The research is just indicating that overall the satisfaction is higher and the performance is higher with social cohesion, and obviously if you have both, that's the best. So again, cohesion matters for both individual and team sports. Even individual sports has a team of people around them, such as personal trainers, fitness trainers, mental trainers, their coach, athletic trainers. All these individuals need to work together and be cohesive to provide the greatest experience. Now, as it pertains to genders, both genders see improved performance with social and task cohesion, but there appears to be a higher relationship for females. It appears that females really want that relational aspect for social cohesion than do the male, but both really thrive in a situation where social and task cohesion are high. And lastly, coaching behavior absolutely influences whether or not teams trust each other and they're cohesive. So it's important that we understand these principles so that we can have the behavior that helps our athletes both have a great experience and improve their performance along the way. So what are some of the factors affecting cohesion? Now, developing a cohesive environment is incredibly complex. We won't go into all the complexities here in this module, but it's important to understand that there are environmental factors, personal factors, leadership style, team factors, cohesion in and of itself, meaning social and task cohesion, and the outcomes all impact whether a team is building their cohesion or if things are starting to chip away at that cohesion. I think the main thing to remember is that our ultimate goal as a coach is to provide an experience that the athletes feel high satisfaction while performing at their best. This requires technical knowledge of group dynamic principles, of cohesion, and aligning your actual coaching behavior with the required behavior of the organization as well as the preferred behavior of the group. And this all stems from our leadership philosophy. In addition to understanding factors that affect cohesion, it's also important to understand the barriers to group cohesion. Some of those barriers include the clashes of personalities. You may have some kids that are really easygoing and others that aren't. This is where you have a personality that may have other-oriented perfectionism clashing with somebody who just wants to achieve their own standard of perfectionism. Also role conflict, right? Especially when recruiting high athletes, athletes that are talented. You may have two highly talented athletes that really are going and fighting after the same position. And when there's that role conflict, it's really imperative that as a coach, you help define roles, give everyone purpose, and eliminate as much of that conflict as possible. Communication is huge, and when there's a breakdown, we've all been a part of a situation where there's been a breakdown in communication. It just leads to all kinds of issues that need to be resolved. There's oftentimes a power struggle between the coach and the players. sometimes within the player groups themselves, and sometimes even within the coaching staff themselves. So you got to understand that we have to mitigate and problem solve regularly with things like power struggle. High turnover refers to the amount of players that come in to your program and leave your program. For instance, at a 4-year school, if you are recruiting freshmen, you get them for 4 years, and then they leave after 4 years. At the community college level, we have a high turnover rate of only having students for 1, maybe 2 years. And that makes it really difficult to maintain a cohesive environment. And then lastly, something to be really aware of is that oftentimes there's disagreement on goals, right? And this just has sometimes to do with personality in the group. It could be that the coach has one idea of the goals where the players have another, and it might be even intra-athlete disagreement. So just understanding that there's a lot of problems that can arise, and we want to be able to strategize to combat those problems as much as possible. Now let's discuss some broad topics of team building principles. One is understanding linear group dynamics. Another one is incorporating a strategy known as the 7 C's of championship team building. And lastly, understanding that there are principles to cohesion that will enable us to put into practice some things that will help cohesion develop naturally. So it's important that all leaders understand that groups go through a process. And within this process, if you can identify where your group is at, you can actually help mitigate some of the problems that arise and help your group through some stages to the eventual stage of where we want them to be performing at their highest ability. By being able to move athletes and a group through the stages of linear group dynamics, you'll help build positive relationships. You'll have higher levels of cohesion, which will lead to greater effort. And it's really important because at the end of the day, again, our main goal is to have high satisfaction and high performance. And understanding this will enable us to do that. So let's take a look at each of these stages. First is the forming stage. After the forming stage is the storming phase, leading us into the norming stage, and then finally the performing stage, which is where we all want to get as a coach. Now in the forming stage, this is more of our honeymoon stage, and during this time it requires a lot of team building. This is where we set our common goal and we get our journey off to a good start, hopefully. In the storming phase, this is where there's emotional resistance. This is where your commitment of your athletes will be evident. Either you'll notice some are really committed, others aren't. And this is also where constructive conflict enters into the group dynamic. So you're going to have people, after the honeymoon stage, people then start sizing each other up and start judging them on their effort, on their attitudes, on their abilities. Maybe there's, again, the role conflict issue arises here in the storming phase. And it's important to understand that this is absolutely normal, but it just requires a leader to be able to have good conflict resolving skills and problem solving skills. And developing interpersonal relationships is the key at this stage. And once you've been able to help your group through some of these conflicts and resolved it, you can enter the norming stage. And the norming stage is where communication becomes clear, people accept their roles, and now you have actually complementary roles, and the norms are set, where you have the standard of excellence is now set in that norming stage. And that's a really critical part of group dynamics. But again, remember that group dynamics is not linear in one direction. For instance, you might be in the performing stage, and then your star athlete gets injured, season-ending injury. You might go back into the storming phase because now you might have role conflict again. You might have, just other issues that are arising, and there's more conflict. And once that conflict arises, if you don't get rid of it in a healthy way and you don't resolve it in a healthy way, you might get back into storming and never get back to performing. So again, understanding that it can both go in the positive direction and in the negative direction will help us maintain pulse on the heartbeat of our team and which stage they are in linear group dynamics. So what should we expect as far as performance in terms of getting through these stages? Well, just like in physical training where your body has to adapt before it actually starts improving its performance, the same thing with groups. In the beginning, in the forming and storming stages, you're actually going to see a decrease in team performance. This is why this is important to address all these things in the preseason. And that way, by the time season hits, you're already in the norming phase and on to hopefully even the performing stage. So expect that your team may show a dip in performance early on in off-season or preseason. Don't be alarmed. Just continue to set the right norms and keep working on building trust and developing cohesion. Because in the performing stage, that is absolutely where you feel the greatest cohesion. And again, this might be only task cohesion, but hopefully it's both task and social cohesion. And if you have to focus on one, focus in on that social cohesion, because that will give you the greatest opportunity to get to the performing stage. Okay, as mentioned, it's really important as a leader that we understand these stages, because if we're unfamiliar with these stages, we might be pulling our hair out trying to figure out how do we get our team out of that forming and storming stage. And so, again, being able to have good interpersonal conflict resolution strategies and understanding that we need to be able to assign roles and have role acceptance is a key to getting out of the storming phase. And oftentimes, coaches get impatient and they may just try to push a team into the norming stage and try to make it as though here's the set norms, you just live up to them. And again, that happens with an autocratic style of coaching oftentimes, where they try to push the team into a phase that they're not quite ready for. And just like any relationship, it's important that you let it organically develop, but you as a leader need to be able to have a pulse on that heartbeat so that way you can direct and guide the individuals of the team to be able to push them through into the norming stage, set appropriate standards for excellence and core values, adherence to core values and behaviors. So that way when you get there, that's now your set place in the linear group dynamics, and then you can fluctuate in between norming and performing stages, more than going from a performing stage all the way back to a storming phase, which can be critical depending on when that occurs in a season. Could mean the difference between making the playoffs, winning a championship, or even just winning the game at that moment. So again, we're not always going to try to focus in on the win, but it's interesting to note that when teams are cohesive, they tend to fight harder for each other, and they tend to be and have that winning mindset. So they tend to just be more successful in terms of outcomes. Understanding linear group dynamics is just one of the keys to developing trust and cohesion in a team. Now, I was first introduced to the 7 C's of championship team building back in 1995 when I was working with the University of Arizona women's softball team. Our mental skills coach was Jeff Jensen, and this is his development and what he came up with in order to help teams develop into champion-minded individuals as well as championship-minded teams. And so I got to actually live and breathe these core principles, these 7 C's, and I can absolutely say with certainty they are critical to team success. I saw a team that was not nearly as talented as the rest of the top teams in the nation, but that did not stop us from winning a national championship and having incredible satisfaction in the journey along the way. These 7 C's are common goal, commitment, clear communication, constructive conflict, complementary roles, credible coaching, and finally, cohesion, the ultimate goal in everything we try to do as a coach. The common goal is right in line with our target outcomes. This provides us with a compass to our destination. They need to be realistic but challenging, and it must be embraced by all. When it comes to commitment, this is actually what differentiates the really extraordinary teams from just the ordinary teams. It requires a deep level of commitment by everybody involved, from the coaching staff to the training staff, to the athletes themselves, even to the administration of the schools. Because it creates a sense of personal and group accountability and a group belongingness, right? When everybody is committed, there's that feeling of belongingness, and we know that belonging to something or feeling that sense of belonging really helps increase that intrinsic motivation, which will drive our behavior in a very positive way. This also leads to that obligation to give your best effort. And really, when everybody has that as their set standard that we're going to commit to excellence, it really helps the group to hold each other accountable when they're not staying up to being committed, and they're not holding up to being committed as much as they need to be. Defining roles and having complementary roles is a key to championship team building as well. This requires that the individuals are willing to accept the role that the coach sees for them. It develops with that coach-athlete trusting relationship. So again, the importance for building a trusting relationship between the athlete and coach is because when you assign them a role, you want to make sure that, one, they know that you feel that they're important, that everybody on the team has a specified role and that it's valuable to the success of the team. And this gives everybody the chance to participate in the journey. For instance, you may have an individual on the team that isn't as talented as somebody else in the physical sense, but maybe they're extremely talented with graphic design or music or video or something else that they may bring to the table that allows them to be involved in a way that doesn't require them to feel as though they aren't competent in their skills on the court, but rather they're competent in skills that allow the team to be successful along the journey. So it's important to be able to identify strengths and weaknesses in your athletes, but not just from the physical talent of the skill needed for the sport, but as a whole person. That can only help an individual feeling of self-worth. And when people feel self-worthy, again, that drives their intrinsic motivation. Next, we have clear communication. Again, open and honest communication is key here, both between players and coaches, and coaches, all through and through. It needs to be clearly communicated. One is our vision and our core values, obviously, but also our strengths and our weaknesses, our concerns and anxieties, right? This is where that vulnerability comes into play. If we feel that we have trust within the group, we can be vulnerable and clearly communicate. And this happens both on and off the field. It's inevitable that there's going to be conflict whenever you have a group of people. And the key to this is not seeing it as a negative. We got to change that mindset. And as a leader, we got to view that as conflict, but as constructive conflict, something that all teams will essentially go through. And it's the ones that have good strategies in resolving this conflict that help. Again, this is that difference between moving from the storming stage into the norming stage. And even when you're in the norming stage, you may have conflict within an event, or maybe, teams that lose too often, and maybe they're not expecting to lose. All of a sudden they find themselves losing. All of a sudden there's more conflict because people start getting upset at other people, right? So that being the case, constructive conflict is normal. It needs to happen, but it must be kept under control. Not everyone will always agree, but dealing with it appropriately will help strengthen your team. Now, as has been the theme throughout this module, cohesion is the ultimate goal. We know it enhances our performance, and it requires that there's a genuine like and respect for everybody. And that, what it really turns out to be is it just makes the experience so much better when we provide an environment that's one motivational, one that builds trust, and one that develops this cohesion. It makes everybody want to show up to practice, put in effort, because they're just enjoying the journey. And that's really made possible with credible coaching. And there's a phrase out there that Theodore Roosevelt said years and years ago: nobody cares how much you know until they know you care. So it's essential that coaches share their empathy and that they show concern to their athletes. Everybody's going to struggle, and including coaches, right? But it's really the coach's job to share with them that empathy. But in addition to that, it's also important that you have the right training and the right skill set and the right knowledge, both on the field and strategies and those kind of areas, but also in the mental skills area, in the team cohesion area. All these things really lead to us being able to identify and relate with our players in a way that builds those relationships. And really, if we really were to boil it down to one element as far as coaching, it really is our leadership style. We need to be that transformational leader, because within that construct, you will be able to develop that mutual trust and cohesion that is so desired by anybody who is leading a team in a journey. So if cohesion is the end goal, how do we get there? What are some things we can do to make it feel like it's naturally happening? Well, we got to develop what's known as collective efficacy. Collective efficacy is essentially the belief and confidence in each other's abilities to meet the training and competitive demands. Now, this comes from skill development, mental skill development, comes from team cohesion, leadership. There's a lot of things that drive into collective efficacy, and it's very complex, but we can at least begin to understand a few of the elements that lead us there. And within collective efficacy, we actually have some guidelines that can help it seem as though we're making it happen naturally. Some of the factors that affect the development of collective efficacy are things such as proximity, similarity, distinctiveness, that's social support, and the fairness. Proximity refers to physical and emotional closeness, right? We've been talking about that, building trust throughout this whole module, and that's a big component of it. But it's also that physical closeness, when you train together, when you hang out together, when you do things both on and off the field, that helps develop both that physical and emotional closeness. Now, similarity really deals with common ground. What are your goals, and are you similar in your levels of commitment, right? So developing that common goal is really critical for developing that similarity. Distinctiveness, well, distinctiveness is what sets you apart from other people, right? It's your uniqueness. It might be the rituals or the uniforms you wear. Could be cheers, right? We see this in sports all the time. Think of the All Blacks. They have the haka that they do before every match. That's one of their rituals. Every team has their uniforms, and you walk around a campus and you'll see that the team is, basketball or volleyball and whatnot. That's creating that uniqueness and distinctiveness within the group. And so it's important that you create that distinctiveness. Now, it's also important that we develop that social support. And this comes from team and the friends, family, and even the community. And that social support is really enhanced when you start engaging the community into your sporting events and allowing them to partake. And this could be through social media or through actual, inviting them to come to your event to cheer on your team. But it's really important that we develop that social support. And then there's fairness. And fairness really comes back down to reinforcing the core values and the philosophy that you put in place to begin this journey. So what are some of the results of us building trust and developing cohesion? Well, you get an increased attitude on the team, increased motivation and perseverance through difficult times and challenges. You're going to set the right kinds of goals. You're going to get commitment to achieve those goals. Your people skills will improve. Your coping skills will improve, all leading to improved concentration, leading us to the end goal that we desire as a coach, which is having the highest satisfaction with the highest performance possible.